Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us here today for the third installment in our six-part series, Educating the New Congress, a step-by-step advocacy training series for homeless educators and service providers. Next slide, please. Okay, so I know that the majority of you who may be attending today may be familiar with SchoolHouse Connection, but I just want to invite anyone, if you're not familiar with SchoolHouse Connection, feel free to visit our website at www.schoolhouseconnection.org to learn a little bit more about our organization, and also sign up for our newsletter. We invite everyone to do that. You'll find out about new resources for educators, youth, service providers, policy updates as well, and all of the good stuff. So if you like good stuff, sign up for our newsletter. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are already in the third installment of our six-part series, and today's topic is, what does successful advocacy look like? And we are going to be learning from our peers. And I am so excited to have the panel that we have today, and everyone is going to introduce themselves in a bit. But first, we're going to kind of just do a quick recap of what we've covered in the previous two sessions. Next slide, please. Okay, so in our first installment, we were just getting grounded. So we kind of covered all of the reasons why we're here today, including the importance of constituent engagement in federal advocacy, the unique dynamics of the 117th Congress, the difference between advocacy and lobbying, because I know a lot of the members of our network work for school districts or just general LEAs and have the concern of whether or not their advocacy would constitute as lobbying. So we covered that. In our second session, we featured two guest presenters from the congressional offices or the Senate offices of Senator Lisa Murkowski and Senator Joe Manchin. We went through with them the best strategies for communicating with members of Congress and their staff, how to conduct an effective meeting with a member of Congress and their staff, including the preparation, what to say or do during the meeting, following up, and some tips and tricks with do's and don'ts. Then the last thing we covered was how to conduct advocacy online, especially as we continue to move through the pandemic and so much has switched to the virtual world and other forms of advocacy. And you can find archived versions of both of these webinars on SchoolHouse Connection's website under our archived webinars tab, and we also have them hyperlinked in the presentation. And so without further ado, we will be introducing our lovely panel. So first, we're going to go with Dominique. Dominique, do you want to tell everyone about yourself?
Hi, my name is Dominique Tornavi. I serve as Chief Impact Officer for Family Promise of Morris County. We help families and individuals experiencing homelessness, on the brink of homelessness, and assist them in obtaining stable housing, whatever stage or phase they may be in.
Awesome. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Douglas. I'm the homeless liaison for the Kansas City Public School District in Kansas City, Missouri. I've been with the school district for probably over 12 years now and servicing our disadvantaged or at-risk families for about 8 of those years.
Thank you. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Bicknell. I'm the Executive Director of New Beginnings in Lewiston, Maine, and we are the only agency in the state that solely provides services for runaway and homeless youth across 3 counties here in central Maine.
Awesome. And Tanya?
Good afternoon. I'm Tanya Monnier, and I am a social worker, McKinney-Vento liaison for a school district in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have about 14 schools in my district, and we serve about 11,000 students.
Great, thank you all so much, and we're so happy to have you all here. And I just want to add that everyone here who we have on our panel today has participated in successful federal policy advocacy before, and some persons even have experience at the state level as well. In fact, Chris actually just came from testifying in the Maine legislature. So that just shows everyone how dynamic it is and how exciting it can be hopping out of that, coming right to this webinar to speak about it. It's also great. Okay, so we're going to jump into our first question, and I want to ask everyone, can you tell us a bit about or shares with us some of your experience in participating in or leading successful advocacy efforts on behalf of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness? And we are going to start with Melissa.
Okay, well, my advocacy has been it's just kind of been a little bit all over the place. So it's usually lots of conversations with my friends that have other friends that are in elected positions. Here in Kansas City, we have a unique group amongst the Black community, and this group is very, they're very responsible for making sure that they are vetting candidates and seeing what platforms that they are on and are they of benefit for our minority communities on the east side of town. And so those individuals help elect people to public office, both at our, at our city levels. So our most local levels are committee people, as well as our state representatives, and of course our more senior leadership that goes up to DC. So it's just really having those conversations and just really just saying, hey, what is it? Can you do? What are you doing? They're doing this in the St. Louis area. How come we can't get that? That was just a simple conversation, and we got a couple $1,000s out of that. So I was pretty excited. But with all of that and just me really trying to service our students and our families to make sure that we have community resources that are available is really, just all self-serving, because if I can continue to promote our city and promote the resources that we have within our city, families and students will continue to stay in our city. And so therefore, we grow our school district by default. And so with that being said, I became a committee person, a committee woman. And I don't do anything other than just on election day, just kind of make sure that that all of our poll workers are available on the polls, they are properly educated, and just really to be a pillar and a recognizable face within our community. So my advocacy work has gone all over the place.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the history. Okay, next we're going to go to Tanya.
So I've been with my school district for 22 years, and with a background in social work, we were instilled in our education about advocacy. And so I've always felt like in my 22 years, I've advocated for families and students and teachers and whomever needs advocating for. But probably within the last 5 to 7 years, I've really noticed that I need to take more of an action with legislation change, especially working with homeless youth, because one of my passions is bridging that transition for homeless youth going from high school to college. And Indiana is a little behind in the game. There's states around Indiana that have great programs. And so just really, I've noticed that if I can go into higher ed is a whole different ballgame for me. So I really needed that leverage of legislation change, policy change. And it's much easier to say, hey, this law is going to go into effect and eventually you're going to have to do it. So just educating my legislators here in my community about the needs of the homeless youth, because often I feel like we tell the story of our students and our families, and I want their voices to be heard. So that's kind of just my evolution of advocacy.
Great, thank you so much, Tanya. Dominique?
Sure. So with Family Promise, we have a team of licensed social workers that work with our families, work with our youth and our children. And part of our goal as an affiliate of a national model, we're part of Family Promise around the country. This New Jersey affiliate, which I didn't mention earlier, in Morris County, we work with our local representatives to discuss policy issues. And we do so by engaging with our community. We found that many of our constituents are involved, or they know someone who's in a certain position or can speak to different spaces. And by having conversations and kind of removing the stigma of homelessness, we are advocating for our children and our youth in the process, and opening people's eyes to a lot of the things that can be done through policy and through working at a higher level, much to your point, Tanya. So that is one of the things that Family Promise strives to do, is to make sure that we are on track and on target and working with our local representatives. Most recently, or our closest relationship is with Mikey Sherrill's office, the Congresswoman, and she has been a voice and an advocate in many ways. And I believe further down I will discuss that relationship, but that's kind of where it started for us.
Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Dominique, I know you have some slides as well, so if you want us to get into that now, then we will get into that. Lacan, next slide, please.
Yep. So I sent over some information. This is in the bottom corner, you see a photo. That is Joanne Jorgensen. She is our CEO, and she is with the district director for Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. So it's a good story in the fact that it highlights the ease at which things can be done. So when you hear policy, you hear advocacy, how do I get in contact? Do I need to write a letter? Do I need to go somewhere? The long and short of it is Kelly, her mom, volunteers with us. So it's a volunteer connection, and we invited her to the volunteer recognition dinner, and we started to have conversations, and that led us to work more closely with Mikey, because she is our Congresswoman, and so she has concerns about our district, and that enabled us to speak with her further about the Homeless Children and Youth Act. At the time, it was 2019, and through our interactions and working with other nonprofits, bringing them all to the table to advocate for this bill, she willingly co-sponsored and continues to be a voice in this arena, and continues to reach out to Family Promise and ask what our needs are so that she can better represent us when she is in DC and in her office, of course. So yeah, so the big moral of that was that your public officials do want to hear from you, and that it doesn't need to be a stigma. It doesn't need to be a hard thing. It can be a conversation, because they want to help their constituents in one way or another.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Chris.
Hi. So advocacy for me takes all kinds of different forms. So there's city, state, federal advocacy, working with your state agencies, your child welfare agency, your Department of Corrections, your Department of Education, and in the end, it's all about relationship and building relationships, trusting relationships with leadership in those different segments of your community. And you're not always going to agree. I often am in disagreement with our child welfare agency or our Department of Corrections, but I can find things that we can work together on, whether it's the child welfare agency putting forth legislation that I either agree with or disagree with, but we can negotiate how to move that forward, or if it's something that I feel is unseen. So the legislation I was testifying about earlier today, I was in opposition to it. It was well-intentioned legislation, but it had clear unintended consequences that the parties putting it forth didn't see. It didn't differentiate between a family experiencing homelessness and unaccompanied youth. And so I testified to help the people who had written the legislation to see the difference between those two distinct segments of the population that experience homelessness in Maine and everywhere, and that they have different needs and things like that. And so it's about joining with as opposed to going against, and trying to help them learn what it is they want. One of the things that's super important for me in building advocacy efforts is listening to the youth voice and having youth voice with me when I'm doing the work. We have a youth action board here in Maine that's very active, and helping them to learn how to testify. Often youth go to testify and they tell their stories, and that's dramatic and impactful, but it doesn't necessarily move the work forward, the advocacy work forward. And so we help young people learn how to talk about the actual legislation or issue that's being presented and how that will impact their lives and the lives of other young people who come behind them, rather than telling their stories again and re-traumatizing themselves. And so having youth voice that's focused on the advocacy work in a very particular way is really important for me.
Awesome. Yes, that is super important to ensure that we're elevating the voices of those who we're trying to ensure that the legislation or whatever policy benefits as well. So thank you for bringing up that point. Thank you, everyone. So getting into our next question, which I'm sure most of our attendees will appreciate the answer to. With everything that goes on in your day job and all the other roles and responsibilities that come with your regular job, what is it that makes you make the time for policy advocacy? And the first person we're going to be going to is Chris.
Oh, okay. So the work that I do, the way I frame the work for myself anyway, is that we are the safety net for young people who are falling through the cracks of all the other systems in our state. And those young people are often unseen. Youth homelessness is a very invisible challenge. And so for me, it's shining a light on the issue, as well as helping to broaden that safety net, right? So that our safety net is very small. We have this much funding and the problem is this big. So it's helping to broaden that safety net, but also identifying the cracks in the system that young people are falling through and trying to close those up. And so for me, that's when I frame my advocacy work, those are the two real goals I'm trying to achieve. Is how do I create a broader safety net, shine a light on the issue, and close up those cracks that young people are falling through? Because really what I want to do is put myself out of a job. I never want to have to put another young person in our shelter, or have another young person come to our drop-in center, or stay in our TLP. I want to help build a system that moves young people to safety before that happens.
Awesome, thank you. So the next person is Dominique.
Part of our rationale, or how do we incorporate this into the daily? For myself, I am not a social worker, but I am a Chief Impact Officer, which is a large title in the fact that it is development, funding, marketing, and community. So the charge here is taking the good work that our social workers do with our families and telling those stories and conveying what the needs are to the greater public, engaging our board. The amazing things that a nonprofit does is lost if it is not highlighted, if it's not brought to the public view, and if we can't have these conversations and remove stigmas. So that's a big part of me taking on this. I'm also a big advocate. I went back to school for child advocacy and policy. I'm still in grad school, probably will be for a little while longer, because it's incredibly important in that it moves the needle. If we want to see real change, we need to see systemic change, and we need to see these larger things occur in order to truly benefit our children. So that's why Family Promise makes the time.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Tanya?
Well, and for me, being the liaison, the whole reason why I make time is for my students, to give them a voice. I am housed at the high school, so I see firsthand how my community just doesn't have the resources, and I'm sure like everybody else's, for youth, for even shelter space, for families. And just so I feel like I am their voice. And so that's very important to me. And two, just to educate, because a lot of people out there just don't understand. They just think, oh, well, why can't they go stay in a shelter? Why can't they do this or get a hotel? And so just making sure that I educate along the way, just so that I can help best serve my families and youth.
Amazing, thank you so much. And last but not least, Melissa.
Wow. Well, how I make time for advocacy, I don't feel like I have to make time. I feel like it's embedded. What's in me is coming out of me. You know, those conversations that I had talking about leveraging friendships and everything, I just can't help it. You know, they're like, well, what do you do? I'm like, I work for the school district. Well, what do you do? I'm like, do you really want to know? I'm like, I serve our disadvantaged families. I serve our homeless students. Oh, and then going back into the education that Tanya's talking about, we have homeless students. Yes, we have homeless students, but really trying to get at it in our city at a more policy level, something that we can truly see some direct impact, especially with the fact that we have the CARES dollars that are floating through to a variety of agencies, and we still know that it's still not getting to the most vulnerable people in need, our unaccompanied youth, our families that are, you know, experiencing evictions and such, because they no longer have jobs because they are essential workers, and some of the essential workers no longer have jobs because they were in food service. So, you know, just really just trying to paint that picture, and not necessarily the grim picture that some people, you know, people want to hear, you know, sad stories, but I don't want to tell a sad story. I want to tell a story of resiliency. I'm like, look, my family's going to get through, and I'm going to help them come, you know, high water, just to figure out what we have going on. And then we have some great people that are in some of our elected positions that, you know, we do those letter writing campaigns to go through and just add your name to that petition. And, you know, oddly enough, you get responses back. Who knew? But again, just tapping into those individuals that, you know, help craft policy at the state level. I know I've sent several emails, and I mean, like I said, it's just embedded in my day that, you know, we'll go and do it. We have right now our state legislator, we have lots of legislation that are trying to come down the pike that is attacking public education. So I feel like, yes, I work for the school district, but I work at the mercy of all students that are trying to get a public education, because we are all at risk. We're at risk of being homeless because we are definitely one job loss, one medical crisis, one major death away from being homeless ourselves. And so, but more importantly, it's the education behind it to, you know, to shed the light on the fact that our winters get pretty bad here, and not to mention the fact that, you know, we just recently recovered from that big Midwest freeze. I think everybody that was touched by that. And of course, you know, people die, homeless people die, you know, school age, older individuals, veterans, they die during the winter months because they don't have anywhere to go. But again, just having those you know, free flowing, random conversations. Ultimately, our city came through and came up with, you know, a warming center at our convention center that we would never have. And so now the downside about the convention center is that, you know, suburbia families or suburbia city people are dropping them off at the convention center because we do have space. Now, do we have all of the supports in place? Absolutely not. But my mayor is very active on Twitter, and I'm like, hey, how many kids are you seeing down there? And I'm getting immediate responses as to, we don't see any, we're just seeing, you know, older adults. And so just trying to make sure that we know where our families are, and if we do have kids down there, we're going to get them in touch, and we're going to get them to their dedicated school districts as soon as we possibly can. I want him to call me. So, but again, just like I said, just building those positive relationships, it's just embedded throughout my day. Sorry, but not to mention the fact that, you know, participating in some off hours things. You know, it's okay to go to that event. And, you know, I work for the school district. I serve our homeless children and youth. How can you help us? And building those positive relationships from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So basically building off of that question, I want to ask everyone, what was it that gave you the biggest push to engage in advocacy? Like, is there a single event that made you decide, okay, I need to do something about this? Or it could be multiple things. It could be a specific issue area. But what was it that gave you that push to say, I must get involved in this? And we are going to go back to Melissa.
All right. Well, really what happened is that somewhere along the line, women in politics, and I won't even consider myself very political, but women in politics oftentimes enter politics because they are asked, hey, can you run this committee? Can you help, in the screening process? And so that's kind of where the advocacy part started, because as I was talking to my elected official friends, I'm like, homelessness is not that panhandler on the street. Homelessness in schools is something very, very different. And they start asking more probing conversations. And then it ultimately came up with, okay, well, hey, here's a flyer about my program. And it's describing McKinney-Vento at the most basic and most, just low level, high interest level without trying to blow their mind, because oftentimes we blow their mind. And then it has developed to about a 12 to 15 page pamphlet that's really given a little bit more statistics associated with, the fact is that we are here to service our families, but yeah, we want to graduate kids, but at the same time, we know that we have to stabilize that family unit. And only way that we're able to stabilize that family unit is we need to get more shelter beds here, and we need to have additional hotel rooms. Again, going back to some of the great things that our city is doing, not only did they opened up the warming shelter at the convention center, but then they decided to get with one of our larger day stop facilities or agencies, and they are running what we call a dorm, but it's in one of the newer hotels, and so they bought the whole floor. So families enter on a different side. They're, continuing to provide them with additional wraparound services, and they are able to get their needs met. And hey, that I already have a relationship with the people that are there. So if they have a family that's come through and they see kids, they're calling me immediately, regardless if they're mine or not. So again, continue to build those relationships with those variety of individuals. And so then just in another brief conversation, because we've seen something happen in California, like safe parking. And so again, just talking to a couple other people within the community and the COCs, and we're just saying, where do our families park? If there's no room in the shelter and there's no room in the inns, where do they park? Where do they park so they can be safe? And so another community agency has come, they've stepped up and they've created their own partnerships with the church, and they're providing safe parking. So I don't have to create the ideals, but I just continue to prompt the conversation so that we can continue to be the loudest voice to say, hey, you know what, our children are at stake, and what are we gonna do? I mean, because everybody says they wanna help, but how are you gonna help? And I don't need any more hygiene products. I need some money, and I need some actual game plans to go in place. Don't give me any more hygiene products, okay? All right, we got enough soap and shampoo to last a lifetime. I don't know if you all feel the same way, panel.
Back up a box and ship it to Maine. I'll take it.
Okay, thank you so much, Melissa. And next we will jump to Tanya.
So my biggest push, I think, was just being at the high school and getting kids, homeless youth specifically, to graduation, and then sending them off to college, career, a vocational school, but just having, especially the kids that went on to schooling, college or vocational schools, skills, the kids kept coming back to me and saying, okay, I've gotten through my first year of school, but they want another verification letter, or I don't know where to access this. And so it just really got me thinking about, okay, I'm sending my kids off. I want to hand them off to someone. I want somebody to take their hand and say, okay, now you're at this level, and here's how we're going to support you. Here's access to services, resources. And that just wasn't happening in my state. And like I said, there were other states around me that have some great programs. So I was just thinking, why can't we do this? And so, my advocacy started right then and there. I went to look up all the colleges in Indiana and just started writing letters. Just, hey, who's your homeless person? Sometimes I would even try to call, and I would get passed around 5 different times. And I thought, okay, if that was one of my youth or one of their parents, after 2 passing off, they're going to hang up. And so, you know, I just started writing letters and looking at people who might be a person that could advocate for homeless youth. Do they even know they have homeless youth on campus? And what I came to find out was they don't. They think, well, you made it to college, you're not homeless. But what we're finding out, there's a lot of homeless on college campuses. So that really started my advocacy on advocating. And a coworker of mine with me, we started having our own conferences, calling transitions and inviting college people to the table to say, what can we do? And just that grassroots effort got us 8 points of contacts at 8 universities, colleges in Indiana. So now the next step for me is taking it even further, and I want every school in Indiana, because we have some great colleges in my state, and so I just want every single one of them, so that, you know, we can have a database just like we do with McKinney-Vento liaisons that you can look up for any school. I want it to be across the country that you could look up and say, okay, this is the point of contact at that school. Here, student, let me pass you off, let me hand you off, just to make sure that they have those supports.
And Tonya, I know that you have done some work on higher ed legislation with the Indiana senators. Do you want to share a little bit about that as well, that experience?
Absolutely. You know, in my writing letters to colleges, I also decided, you know what, I need to reach out to my Congress woman. Susan Brooks was a big advocate. She unfortunately retired, but I got her a few years before she retired, and she co-signed some legislation. And again, it was just bringing that awareness that we have these youth and families in our schools that are doing the best they can with us with very limited resources. And, you know, I can tell stories of my homeless youth that have a 4.5 GPA. And, you know, I mean, these are good kids and great citizens and great families, and they just need a break. You know, they just need to be heard and for changes to be made. And again, I think we can only do that. We have to reach out. And so, you know, recently too, I was on a call with one of my senators to get some the Emergency Assistance Act here in, well, federally, for him to co-sign. And again, I think it's just bringing more awareness to our legislators that, you know, the need is here, and really understanding where the dollars go and how they can best serve our families.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tonya. Dominique?
So Family Promise in its foundation is aligned with its name. The promise is to family. The promise is that every child will receive a home, should receive a home. And that's the driving force behind the organization as a whole. So when we work with families, our model is that you can enter our services via emergency shelter. You can come in through the community support program, through outreach, through our drop-in center. You might speak with someone on our Navigating Hope mobile unit. However you come to us, we are going to work with you and your family to ensure that you get what you need to obtain housing. And with that comes children, of course, and them being able to go to school and to get what they need to thrive, and to break the cycles of generational poverty or possibly situational poverty, and help them move forward. So that's ingrained in what we do, and it's our mission to ensure that every child has a home.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I do want to say that Family Promise is they're a really important partner organization for SchoolHouse Connection. We collaborate with them a lot on federal policy advocacy and things of that nature. So I can definitely vouch for what Dominique is saying. Next to Chris.
So for me, there was definitely a key issue that got me started in advocacy in about 2005, 2006. our child welfare agency that funds a lot of homeless youth services in the state, said they were going to pull $400,000 of funding for homeless youth in the state. And so at that time, there were 3 agencies in the state that were doing that work, and we were all terrified that that was coming out of our funding. And so we approached the state to find out who was losing the $400,000, and they actually couldn't tell us who. And so that was terrifying because they didn't know who was getting the money. And so we came together and actually collaborated with the state to identify all the different pools of money that they had. They had about a dozen different pools of money and how that money was being spent and where it was being spent. And it turned out that that money wasn't even being spent on homeless youth, but it was identified as homeless youth money, which was crazy making for us all. And so that led to us working with our child welfare agency to create and write a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act for the state of Maine, so that it defined, if there's money for homeless youth in Maine, it has to be spent on these things. And we modeled that bill after the federal Runaway and Homeless Youth Act so that it would be parallel with our federal funding. But it was really that incident of realizing that the state didn't even know how much money it had, where it was coming from, and what it was being spent on, and that we were at risk of losing any or all of it at any time based on shifting political environments. And so that's really what pushed me into doing advocacy work, was like trying to figure out how can we stabilize our resources and have some sense of control over this organic process that evolved over the past 20 years with no real oversight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Okay, so the next question that I want to ask everyone is, what are your most significant lessons that you've learned so far in your advocacy? Like, is there anything that stood out or something that you realized maybe that it just, anything that you'd like to share right now? And we are going to be starting with Chris.
The most significant thing that I've learned is to be persistent, really. Advocacy takes time. Developing those trusting relationships takes time. When I started in this work, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Education, all had adversarial relationships with the service providers in our community. The state or the federal legislative staff also did. And so it's really about taking the time to get to know people, what their goals are, because often the goals are aligned, but the means of getting to that goal are very different, or informed or misinformed. And so building those relationships and getting to know what it is that will draw someone in as opposed to pushing them away. And you know, in our current environment, I think you all know it's really hard. People have gone into their corners and they're not willing to do stuff. But I have to say, you know, Senator Collins is a Maine senator, and she's very conservative in some ways, but she really does support runaway and homeless youth and families and children, and finding that common thread to work on is super important. So that's the biggest lesson that I've learned, is finding those common threads, building partnerships with agencies, with other providers, with legislators and community partners is the most important thing.
Definitely very important. And I just want to add that Senator Collins is actually a co-sponsor of legislation that SchoolHouse Connection is supporting, the Emergency Family Stabilization Act. It was reintroduced in the Senate in early February. And what this bill will do is it will provide direct federal to local funding for community-based organizations and also LEAs to meet the unique needs of children, youth, and families experiencing homelessness. And the funds will be delivered through the ACF at HHS, which is the Administration for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services. So it bypasses the HUD system and just ensures that we meet the needs of children, youth, and families who are classified as homeless under the education definition specifically. So with that, we're going to turn
I just got to jump in here. I'll say that, you know, because of years of relationship building, her office was open to us helping to author that bill, as well as listening to us saying, you shouldn't just support the bill, you should sponsor it, you know? And so it really goes a long way. Take a long time, do everything you need to do to build a relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Turning next to Dominique.
Sure. I will echo a lot of what Chris said, because it is about the relationship building. And for us, it was working with our community partners. So looking at the space that we're in, people within our county that have a similar interest in advocating for youth, especially those experiencing homelessness, and how do we pool our resources? And I think in this current climate and within nonprofit and all spaces, collaborating is just key. It's fundamental to us moving forward. Financially, it makes sense because we just have more feet on the ground and we can do more things and have bigger voices. And that has been a key element, is really working together and finding common ground so that we can go to Mikey Sherrill's office and say, this is what the needs are. This is what we see on the ground. This is what we need you to bring back. And that conversation is invaluable. And what I've learned too is that creates a relationship that enables you to talk about other issues as well. The housing crisis, affordable housing. We can discuss things at a greater level because now we're engaged and we have built a relationship that is more than just an email or just a simple greeting, so to speak. We're at a place now where we can have an honest conversation and say, these are what the needs are, and find things to move forward on.
Awesome. Thank you, Dominique. And next to Tanya.
I think some of the lessons I've learned is to have patience, that it takes time. And of course, I want things to happen immediately for my families and my youth, but it just doesn't work that way. So being patient, making sure that I'm constantly talking about the issues for the families and youth, just because you never know who's going to be listening that can say, you know what, I know so-and-so. So kind of going back to that relationship building and just, again, bringing awareness, I think is some of the biggest things I've learned. And just, again, being patient and that's it.
Thank you, Tanya. And then we're going to Melissa.
Well, I can't bring anything new to the table because everyone has said it, and I just want to reinforce it's the relationship building that is the most imperative. But also at the same time, it doesn't hurt to have data, good solid data, because we know that data drives dollars and dollars drives decisions. And so therefore having, knowing what your homeless children and youth count is at that particular point in time. Not necessarily giving the roundabout exact number that you will report to the state at that one time, but saying, hey, roughly we're servicing about, 500, 1,000 kids. We know that there's only about 100 shelter beds for youth, unaccompanied youth. But also the big significant thing for me is that, like Tanya said, I want it to happen now, but then realized, it can't happen now because some of the extra stuff that goes along with it. And then just hearing all the complicatedness that comes along with something as simple as, Reverend Cleaver or Congressman Cleaver, we need to change the definition of homelessness so it's the same across the board. And then he's like, well, Melissa, we can't do that, but think about it this way. If we did, then that only brings us to only one pot of money. Now we have, right now 5 pots of money. So, just looking at it from a different perspective and saying, okay, well, if that's the case, then how can we tap into those other 5 pots? Because right now we know we only have access to that one. And having those 1 or 2 off conversations, and then all of a sudden it just happens. Things just start happening. You're like, well, whoa, what happened? So I can say that in our city, in our state, well, on this side of the state anyway, is that Representative Cleaver is on he's a proponent or a friend of housing first, and really trying to identify and eliminate the additional loopholes when it comes to servicing families so that we can prevent homelessness and, try to get it try to catch it much earlier than what we are doing right now. So, but again, it's just shooting off an email and building those relationships. And then all of a sudden, some aid is calling you. So at first it may just truck along, and then next thing you know, it just starts moving fast. But I'm just I guess one of the biggest takeaways or significant things is that you have to show the passion. You have to be excited about what it is that you're doing. You just can't say, you know, oh, ho hum. No, they got to see the passion. You almost want to annoy them, so that they know that when you talk to me, you're gonna get the kitchen sink. I'm just gonna throw up all over you, but more importantly, know that I'm advocating for my families. And so I don't want to just tell you a story. I want to tell you a story, and I want you to say, what can I do to help?
Absolutely. Snaps for that. So the last question, I just want to ask everyone, do you have any final pieces of advice that you'd like to share with your peers who are here listening to you today? Any advice at all on just how they can engage in advocacy, or anything else to expect? And I am going to start again with Melissa.
I would tell you, just believe in your cause. I mean, because you're not on this webinar by chance. You decided that you wanted to learn a little bit more. So believe in your cause. Get a little bit of data, stand on your data, and be excited about it, and share it every chance you get. So, you know, again, we all help each other one way, shape, or another. And again, remembering that we're only one major accident or loss away from being homeless ourselves. Homelessness does not discriminate, doesn't care who you are. So therefore, if you are doing this work, or you're interested in this work, keep doing it, because you are benefiting yourself for that just in case moment.
Thank you, Melissa. Tanya?
You know, for me, I never thought I would be this far along and having conversations with congresswomen and senators and everything. So I think my piece of advice is that anybody can do it. But I do agree with Melissa that, you know, it comes off so much more authentic if you've got that passion for it. And, you know, just the data helps, but you know, anyone can do it. Again, I never would have thought that I'd be this far along, because I always thought, oh, I'm just a little social worker, McKinney-Vento liaison at one school. But I mean, that's the power of it, by just speaking up and reaching out and educating and, you know, advocating for the clients you work for. And in our case, the homeless youth and families, you know, we can get a lot of things done and bring a lot of awareness to people that just didn't know. And so, and again, just being patient, you know, that's the hardest part, I think, is just being patient for change, but it will come. And like Melissa said, one day you'll just be sitting there going along, and then all of a sudden, you know, hey, you know, Senator Young's staff wants to talk to you, or you got an email from Congresswoman's staffer that wants to have more, that has questions. So, you know, just being patient and just, but anybody can do it. We all can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dominique?
Definitely the passion. There has to be your own personal concern for it, the reason why you got here, however you got to this position, how you got to this webinar. And then it's also a reminder that our representatives are just people. They're just like you and I. So the level of hesitation, or should I talk to them? Can I talk to them? What do I say? Be kind to yourself, because you're fighting for the children in your community. And so whatever you say is going to be impactful and valuable if it's sincere. So don't be afraid. Just do it, because it's important and you know it's the right thing to do. And when you have that driving you, well, you just start talking, and then you don't stop until people understand what the need is and why it's important. That's my advice.
Thank you so much, Dominique. And last but not least, again, Chris.
Yeah, so I would say don't do what I did, which is start with a statewide bill to change your whole system. Start small, right? Find someone who's working on a bill or an issue that you agree with and testify in favor of it, right? You don't have to be the lead, you don't have to be the push. You want to gain some experience. When I went to testify that first time, I was nervous, my voice cracked. I didn't know what the procedures were or what to expect. Like, you can go to your legislature, and even now you can do it virtually, and sit and watch people testify and see the process. Like, the first time I got up there, I'm at a podium, there's this countdown clock that starts at green, it goes to yellow, goes to red, right? Like my time is almost, you get really nervous. And so learning what to expect and how to talk to your legislative staff in a way that you're not 110% invested in really helps, like building that skill set. So like practice and do something that is not very high risk for you to start in anything that you do, but in this in particular, I think is really important. And I did want to, take a little risk here myself and say I want to challenge Melissa and say that homelessness does discriminate. We know that BIPOC people experience homelessness at much higher rates than other people, and if I can't say that and identify that and advocate for change and put energy and time and money behind changing that, then it's not going to happen. And really to say like that is a core issue now and always has been. And I just want to say that out loud to this group, that if you're going to advocate for something, start there.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for answering your questions and for your time today. So we're going to go to the questions section in a bit. But before that, I want us to skip a few slides, and I just want to plug in a quick commercial for our next, the next installment. And those are just some additional information from Dominique and her experience in advocacy. But I do want to do this quick commercial for the fourth installment coming up next week, entitled Shining a Light, Using Media and Social Media to Boost Legislative Advocacy. We are going to be having some more guests. They're from the Raleigh Communications firm, which is an issues-driven communication firm that SchoolHouse Connection works with really closely. And we're going to just be discussing some basic tips for integrating traditional and social media into your advocacy routine. I know that I believe Melissa was even mentioning earlier about engaging on social media with her mayor, and it's something that and getting answers as well. So it's something that's super effective, and it's just finding as many means as possible to connect to your members of Congress or your state legislators or your mayor. So look out for that, and hope to have everyone joining on that. And now we will get to the questions. Okay, so one question that we have so far, do you sometimes encourage your donors, volunteers, and community partners to contact elected officials about specific legislation? And if you do, what specific methods do you use to do that? Does anyone want to take a stab?
Well, some of the things that we have, like I said, right now, public school here in Missouri is under attack. And so we know that our school board members have gone out, and they've reached out to want to send out some of the most up-to-date legislation or talking points. Basically, they're saying, hey, you know what, this is why we're against, this is how it's going to be a benefit to us on this particular issue, or how it's not. And so we're using that communication through through our board services email, and then of course we try to make sure that when SchoolHouse Connection is sending out a dear colleague letter, that we're sharing that amongst within the school district and within our community members that we know. So we're right now, I won't say it hasn't progressed past emails, but every little bit helps.
Does anyone else want to take a stab? And just want to let our attendees know that if you think of any question during any point in time, feel free to just send them to the questions pane.
Yeah, we sometimes will post things like that on social media, or if we know people who are maybe particularly interested in an issue, do a personal reach out to them from someone within the agency who knows them.
We'll do similar. We'll have social media posts that discuss key issues. And then also we try to make sure our board is aware of what's going on and understands legislation, keeping it bipartisan, but making sure that they have the knowledge of what's at stake and how it'll impact our families, so that this way they can advocate independently as well.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And not seeing any other questions at the moment. And once again, feel free to add some more. But just one person reiterating the problem that Tanya mentioned earlier about services not carrying over to the college level and it being an issue for them as well. Actually, we do have another question. Can anyone give suggestions for identifying and connecting with other service providers who are interested in advocacy? If any of you have ever been engaged in like coalition building or anything like that, just describing your experience.
I'll mention. So we have different groups within Morris County. Of course, there's the COC and other spaces where we address homelessness. We have 211, which is the coordinated entry point for us. So working with people within that space to say what the needs are and then come together. It comes in general conversation, or it can be a formal meeting, of course. But once you agree that you're on the same page or close enough to the same page, then you can start having established meetings and having additional dialogue and conversation and see what each other's resources are and what each person can pretty much put into the pot to help move this forward.
I would also say, the COC is a great network builder, but also just the relationship buildings. And I'm amazed at how word of mouth travels and how quickly I get donors to come forward and say, hey, I heard that you have a food pantry, or that, homeless youth need cap and gowns, or, whatever the need. They'll come to me and say, what do you need? How can my business, how can my, church, how can my, what institution help you? And so I have formed a lot of relationship building that way, and have gotten a lot of the resources and stuff that I need, because, public schools, we are not made of money. We don't have a pot of gold. And so, which I wish we did, but we don't. And so just, that network relationship building again, just in taking any chance I can get to talk about, the needs that our kids face. Just that word of mouth really travels and can produce a lot of resources.
I'd add kind of using the internet. Like if you go to the Family Youth Services Bureau website, you can see who's funded to provide services for homeless youth in your state. Reach out to those agencies. In Maine, we have a database of all the McKinney-Vento liaisons in our state. So you can reach out to different school districts that might be near you that have liaisons who might be interested. And again, the COC is also a good place to connect with like-minded people.
Okay, thank you all so much. And if you have any last minute questions, please do send them to the questions pane. But I definitely just want to extend a huge thanks to our panel for joining us today and for sharing so much information, such great information. I'm sure that our attendees took away so much from all that you've said and all that you shared with us today. I can say with confidence that I've taken away things from what you guys have said today, and thank you so much for just sharing your experiences with us and your knowledge on advocacy. And also thank you to our attendees for joining us today. Once again, I hope to see everyone next week for our 4th installment, and also our 5th and also our 6th. But thank you all so much for coming today. And yeah, I think we can close out now, giving everyone 2 minutes back of their time, whatever that's worth. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye.
Thank you.